Welcome, everyone. I'm Sally Ranney, president and co-founder of Global Choices and the Arctic Angels, an all-women international organization focused on the polar ice crisis. Our panelists today include Xiye Bastida, an Arctic Angel and climate justice activist, co-founder of Re-Earth and organizer of Fridays for the Future. Mitzi Jonelle Tan, an Arctic Angel as well and climate justice activist, co-founder Youth for Action in the Philippines, Climate Action, and international team member of Fridays for the Future. And Bill McKibben, we are so honored to have you as our moderator today, the co-founder of 350.org, and you're at Middlebury College as a fellow right now. So please take it away.
Well, Sally, thank you very much for this important event. It's a pleasure to join you, in part because, I've gotten to stand up on the great ice shelves in Greenland and watch big chunks of them fall into the ocean. There's nothing abstract about the crisis we're talking about today. It's one of the clear manifestations of a rapidly heating climate. And it's one of the things that's going to drive damage in ways that we're just beginning to understand. It's not just that the sea level is rising, though that is a horrible function of this. It's also that as the Arctic has melted, it's begun to affect the ways that the jet stream operates, and we see strange phenomenon like the polar vortex in Texas earlier this winter. We're beginning to worry that the Gulf Stream itself and the great ocean currents are beginning to be altered by this melt of water. And of course, there are millions of people who live in the Arctic whose lives are being upended, turned upside down, because the world that they have known for hundreds of generations is now suddenly entirely different. So it couldn't be more important to have people speaking out about this, particularly these Arctic angels from around the world. And it's a real pleasure today to get to talk with a couple of the best activists I know around the world. And I'm just going to get straight to them. Xiye, let's start with you. One of the things that you've talked a lot about and really powerfully is the intersectionality of the climate crisis and the importance of action across generations. Does this feel like it links up with what's going on in the Arctic and on the ice to you?
Yeah, definitely. When we think about the intersectionality of the climate crisis, it means that, one issue affects the other and that affects the other. And when it comes to melting ice, like you mentioned, rising sea level, this is destabilizing communities. It's shifting people's way of life, is shifting how people get their food, is shifting the relationship that we have with Mother Earth. It's also its own crisis because it's affecting, micro ecosystems. It's affecting the way that communities in the Arctic and in Alaska and in just places that depend on ice are functioning. In places like Bangladesh, that has one of the biggest deltas in the world, melting ice is wiping communities away, creating climate refugees. This is why this is an intersectional crisis, because it affects so many different sectors. And it's not hard to put our efforts together and address what's happening in the Arctic, because we don't want it to be drilled, we don't want it to be exploited, we want it to be protected. And that's what the Arctic Angels are supposed to do. We're supposed to be the voice of protecting the Arctic. And when it comes to intergenerational cooperation, in Indigenous culture, we have this system of talking to elders about wisdom and sharing that wisdom. And one of those pieces of wisdom from Indigenous peoples who live in the Arctic is, protect, just protect your ecosystem, protect where you get your life from, give back. So definitely intergenerational cooperation is important, the sharing of information, and just the fact that we as youth shift the conversation to caring for the Arctic, because the conversation was there for a really long time. It shifted away from there because we didn't see how intersectional the issue was. But now that we know how the melting ice affects all of us, we can go back and take a stance against the drilling of the Arctic and other issues. So if you want to join us in this fight to protect the Arctic, I encourage you to go to globalchoices.org and sign up to be an Arctic Angel with me and Mitzi and so many other amazing people around the world.
Absolutely. It's so well said. Let's go to Mitzi. Mitzi, you live in the Philippines. You know, the only ice you encounter day to day is in a cube in the bottom of a glass. So why do you care about what happens many thousands of miles away up in the Arctic?
Well, as Xiye already mentioned, everything is linked together, and those in the most affected areas or the global south, like countries in the Philippines, are those experiencing the worst of the climate crisis, and we can't treat parts of the climate system in isolation. Everything is interconnected, and it all starts with the Arctic. It's the place that's heating the fastest anywhere else in the world, and the Arctic has already hit 2 degrees Celsius plus temperature rise. And this has impacts on people, especially in small island nations like the Philippines. As Xiye mentioned, with Bangladesh, climate refugees are rising. The Philippines is also one of I think it's the second highest number of climate refugees within our own country. And it's at some point, we're going to end up not having places to seek refuge within our own country. We'll have to leave our own country. And that's a horrible thought for me, to have to leave my nation, my country, because of the climate crisis, which is being caused by the same countries, the same multinational companies that are drilling in the Arctic and in the ice. And so this really is interconnected, as Xiye mentioned. We have to make sure that when we talk about the climate crisis, it isn't just about carbon dioxide emissions and numbers and vague graphs, which is very important. Like, the science behind the climate crisis is very important, but also remember the people that are most impacted. Also remember how everything happening across the world is going to impact those in the most affected areas, those in the most exploited areas of the world today. And it has to be at the top of the global agenda, because it's not just making typhoons and storms stronger, it's also causing issues like food insecurity and more class inequality. And this is something that has to be talked about and has to be brought at the front of the agenda.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Sally, you've been listening to this testimony from the next generation about all this, and it's as eloquent and powerful as it's possible to be. You bring us home now. Why does this matter overall? Why do you do what you do?
Well, you know, the polar ice, Bill, is basically going extinct. And the reality of this is that its fate is our future. And in the Arctic specifically, the centerpiece to all of this is the Arctic sea ice. And because that's the indispensable planetary cooling system. And we're losing it because of the unprecedented loss of ice to melting. And as you said, it's impacting climate regulators, the jet stream, ocean currents, food chains for many species, including us, floods, droughts, extreme weather, fires as far-flung as Northern Africa and even California, and less precipitation in the Amazon has been linked to Arctic sea ice loss. This is a global phenomenon. This is a global system that affects all of us. The Central Arctic Ocean actually is an ice shield. It keeps the albedo effect intact. That's the reflection of the sun's heat and radiation. When the ice is gone, that all is soaked into the dark ocean, higher temperatures, and the ice keeps melting. So it's a vicious circle. One of the interesting things about the Central Arctic Ocean is that it's a high seas global commons, meaning it has no jurisdiction. It's not owned by any countries yet. It belongs to all of us, and it's the rightful heritage of all of humanity. And that the voice of the Arctic Angels brings this piece forward too. But that could radically change, because some of the Arctic coastal countries have submitted for extensions of their 200-mile limits, including the seafloor all the way to the North Pole. So that would eliminate the global commons. So we're calling for an immediate action to protect the Central Arctic Ocean ice shield from deep seabed mining, oil and gas exploitation, seismic testing, radioactive waste dumping, nuclear weapon testing, and shipping. For at least 10 years, let's give science time to catch up. Let's give time for emission cuts to kick in. And, you know, this is a global SOS because it's so measurable. and it's calling out global leaders to be accountable, to step up to the necessary, really deep emission cuts we must commit to at the next UN meeting in November on climate. 50% reduction by 2030, net zero as fast as possible. And also, scientists are telling us that the global eco-services of the sea ice have a much better future if we keep global temperatures at 1.C. So Global Choices is taking the ice crisis to the top of the global agenda and to the streets. So I just want to leave with this. 1 ton of CO2 emitted melts 32 square feet or 3 meters square of ice. And you can take that home and evaluate what you're doing with your own carbon footprint.
Very powerful. Look, I think the message that everybody's been sending today is it doesn't matter if you live a long ways away from the Arctic. As the Arctic melts, that's coming to you. And we need you to be a part of the fight to keep things the way that they have been for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. Go to globalchoices.org and sign up. You too can be an Arctic advocate, and this planet badly needs for you to do it. Thank you very much.